My husband's dying ex asked for his company, he agreed, and I vanished from his life forever. Chapter 1, A Quiet Betrayal. I sat at the kitchen table, the soft glow of the morning sun filtering through the curtains, casting a peaceful warmth over the room. But inside, I felt anything but peaceful. It had been a week since I anonymously transferred money to Ethan's ex-girlfriend, Clara, who had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. I had done it out of a desire to help, to do something kind for a woman who was facing the cruelest of fates. But now, as I sat there, I knew my act of charity had not gone unnoticed. The door creaked open, and Ethan walked in, his briefcase in hand, a furrowed brow settling on his face. He had just returned from a long day at work, but his mood was darker than usual. I didn't need to ask what was wrong. The tension between us had been growing ever since I found out about Clara's diagnosis. I knew he had been in contact with her, helping her through this difficult time, but I never imagined it would affect me like this. Without saying a word, he dropped his briefcase on the table and walked over to me. His eyes were cold, a sharp contrast to the warm light of the morning. I looked up, expecting him to say something, but instead, he threw a small envelope onto the table, the contents spilling out in front of me. I froze as I saw the card, my name scrawled across the front in Clara's handwriting. I glanced up at Ethan, my heart pounding. "You think I wouldn't find out?" Ethan's voice was low, his anger barely contained. "You think you can just throw money at her and pretend nothing is wrong?" I opened my mouth to speak, but he cut me off, his voice rising. "We're already married. What more do you want?" He leaned closer, his eyes locking onto mine with intensity. "Do you want to humiliate a dying person with money?" His words struck me like a slap. I didn't expect him to react this way. I had done this out of kindness, out of compassion. But in Ethan's eyes, it seemed like a betrayal. I had no intention of hurting him or Clara, yet here I was, being accused of doing just that. I stayed silent, feeling the weight of his anger in the space between us. I could hear my heartbeat thudding in my ears as I tried to steady my breath. The silence hung heavy, thick with unresolved emotions. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I spoke, my voice soft but firm. "Ethan, it was you who proposed to me first." I wasn't sure where the words came from, but they felt like the only truth I could hold on to. It was always him who pushed for our relationship. It was his decision to marry me, to make promises that we both knew were difficult to keep. He looked at me in disbelief, as if my words didn't make sense to him. His gaze softened, but only for a moment. "You're right," he said, his voice quieter now, though still tinged with frustration. "But that doesn't mean I owe you an explanation for every little thing I do. Clara is in pain, and I'm just trying to be there for her." A knot formed in my stomach. I knew he felt torn, but I also felt the sting of his words. Was I just a convenience for him? Was our marriage truly just a backdrop to his unfinished business with Clara? "I just wanted to help," I whispered, feeling smaller by the second. I didn't want anything in return. I just thought. "You thought you could fix everything, didn't you?" Ethan interrupted, his tone now almost accusatory. "You can't fix everything, and you can't change the past. Clara and we had a history. You don't get to erase that." His words hit me like a hammer. I had never tried to erase their history, but now, it seemed like he was implying that I could never be enough to replace what he once had with her. The room was filled with an uncomfortable stillness. I felt the sudden urge to disappear, to leave this house, this marriage, and the pain that came with it. But I stayed, not knowing what else to do, as Ethan turned and left the room without another word. As I sat there, the silence consuming me, I realized one thing: I was losing him. And I didn't know how to stop it. But then, something inside me shifted. I knew I could no longer live in the shadow of his past, nor could I continue to be a silent witness to the emotional storm that was brewing between us. It was time to make a decision that would change everything. I would vanish from his life forever. And with that, the first chapter of my story began. Chapter 2, The Silence That Followed. The days after that confrontation felt like a blur. The house, once filled with the hum of daily routines and quiet conversations, now felt cold and empty. Ethan was distant, lost in his thoughts, and I could feel the walls between us grow thicker with each passing moment. The silence was suffocating, and despite being physically present in the same space, emotionally, we couldn't have been further apart. I began to retreat into myself, spending more time in the solitude of my study, away from the house's echoing emptiness. I could feel Ethan's gaze on me from time to time, but it wasn't the gaze of the man I married. It was the gaze of someone who was conflicted, someone torn between his past and his present. And I couldn't compete with the weight of his memories of Clara. I told myself it was for the best. If he needed to be there for her, to say goodbye, then I would not stand in his way. I wasn't naive. I knew the gravity of the situation. Clara was dying, and she was still a part of his life, whether I liked it or not. But the ache in my chest, the quiet betrayal I felt, was unbearable. Every time he left to visit her, I could see the sorrow in his eyes, the way his hands shook as he reached for the door, and I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that he wasn't truly with me anymore. One night, as I sat in the living room, a soft knock echoed through the silence. I opened the door to find a manila envelope resting on the doorstep. No name. No return address. Just a simple package. I brought it inside, my heart pounding in my chest, and opened it carefully. Inside was a letter from Clara, written in her shaky handwriting. My fingers trembled as I read it. Ethan has been my only constant through the darkest times of my life. I've always known I'd never have him fully, but I've cherished the moments we've had. He's a good man, and he deserves happiness. If that happiness is with you, then I give him to you with all my heart. Please take care of him. He needs you more than you know. The words hit me harder than I had anticipated. Clara wasn't asking me to take Ethan from her, she was giving him to me, perhaps in a way that she knew was the only way left for her to hold on. The finality of her words broke something inside of me, and I realized then that I had to let go. Let go of the jealousy, the fear, the resentment that had built up over the past few days. Because in that moment, I understood, Ethan's heart had never fully been mine. It had always belonged to her, and no matter how much I tried to change that, I couldn't. I didn't know what to do with the letter. It felt like a final seal on a chapter one had never truly been a part of. But one thing was clear, I could no longer stay in a marriage where I was always playing second fiddle. I wasn't just a woman who had to live with the consequences of Ethan's love for another woman. I was someone who needed to rediscover my own worth outside of him. That night, as I lay in bed beside Ethan, I knew something had to change. The man I married, the man who had once looked at me with love in his eyes, was gone, and in his place was a man still trapped in the past, torn between loyalty and love. He didn't realize it yet, but the gap between us was insurmountable. The decision, though painful, was inevitable. I would leave. The next day, while Ethan was out visiting Clara, I packed my things quietly. It was almost surreal, the act of preparing to leave the life I had once called mine. I took only what I truly needed, leaving behind the memories of a marriage that had been doomed from the start. I couldn't stay in a place where I was always going to be second best. I had to reclaim my life, my identity, and my happiness. I left him a note, simple yet profound, placed on the kitchen counter where I knew he would find it. Ethan, I've made the choice to walk away. I'm not angry, I simply can't stay in a life that's not mine to live. You and Clara deserve the time you have left together. I hope, in the end, you both find peace. Goodbye, forever. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but I left. I left behind the house, the marriage, the man I thought I could build a future with. And as I drove away, the weight of the decision hit me. For the first time in months, I felt free. But that freedom came at a high cost. My heart was broken, and the person I thought I would grow old with was no longer a part of my life. I didn't know where I was going, or what I would do next. All I knew was that I couldn't stay where I was no longer wanted. I would figure it out on my own, without him. Without the shadow of his past haunting me. And so, I vanished. Without a trace, without a second thought. I was done. Chapter 3, A New Beginning. The road ahead was unknown, and every mile I drove felt like a step further into a new life. The weight in my chest didn't ease, but it became bearable with each passing day. As I left the city behind, I focused on the freedom of the open road. I was no longer the woman who clung to the remnants of a marriage that had slowly faded away. I was someone new, a woman who had finally realized that her worth wasn't tied to the approval or affection of a man who never truly belonged to her. I checked into a small, quiet inn by the coast. It wasn't much, but it felt like a world away from the life I had just left behind. The salty breeze from the ocean, the soft sound of the waves crashing against the shore, and the solitude of the place gave me space to think, to breathe, to rediscover myself. I was alone, but for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't lonely. I spent the next few weeks finding peace in my own company. I walked along the beach in the early mornings, listening to the rhythm of the ocean as it mirrored the tumultuous feelings inside me. I started to journal again, something I hadn't done in years. I wrote about my pain, my confusion, and my newfound clarity. Each entry felt like a step toward healing. But as the days passed, I began to realize something I had known deep down but had been too afraid to acknowledge. I wasn't just running away from Ethan. I was running away from the version of myself that had been too willing to sacrifice my happiness for someone else's. I spent the afternoons exploring the small coastal town. I stumbled upon a quaint little bookstore tucked away on a side street, its shelves lined with books of every genre. It was here, between the pages of stories I could lose myself in, that I began to dream again. I hadn't realized how much I had neglected my own passions until I was given the chance to rediscover them. One rainy afternoon, I found myself sitting by the window in the bookstore's small cafe, sipping coffee and reading an old novel I had once loved. The world outside seemed distant, as if time had slowed just for me. In the quiet moments of solitude, I felt a shift in myself. I was no longer the woman broken by love and betrayal. I was becoming someone stronger, someone who could choose herself above all else. I spent the following weeks diving deeper into this new version of myself. I applied for a job at the bookstore, and though it wasn't glamorous or exciting, it felt like the right fit for the woman I was becoming. The owner, an older woman named Mary, was kind and understanding. She saw something in me, something that I had almost forgotten existed. With her encouragement, I began to reconnect with my love for writing, something I had always pushed aside for the sake of others. But despite my efforts to move forward, there was one thing that I couldn't escape: Ethan. Every so often, I would find myself thinking about him. What was he doing? How was Clara? Would he ever think of me again? But I quickly pushed those thoughts aside. I couldn't afford to dwell on the past, not when I had finally started to live for myself. Then, one evening, as I closed up the bookstore, I received a call. It was from an unknown number. I hesitated before answering, but something urged me to pick up. "Hello?" I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Is this Ava?" The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, yet there was something about it that made my heart race. "Yes, this is Ava." "Who is this?" "This is Clara." The name hit me like a bolt of lightning, and I froze. "I know you've been avoiding Ethan, but he needs to talk to you. He hasn't stopped looking for you." My breath caught in my throat. The world seemed to stop as I processed her words. Ethan was looking for me? Why? After everything that had happened, why would he come after me now? He's been a wreck since you left," Clara continued, her voice soft, almost fragile. "I never wanted things to be like this, Ava. I know he hurt you, but he loves you. I can see it in the way he's been searching for you." I felt a wave of conflicting emotions wash over me. On one hand, the part of me that still loved Ethan wanted to believe her. But on the other, the woman who had walked away with her head held high knew better than to fall into the same trap again. "I don't want to go back," I said quietly, my voice steady. "I left for a reason, Clara. I can't go back to that life." There was a long pause before Clara spoke again. "I understand. But if you're ever ready to listen, to understand the truth, he'll be waiting. He just wants to make things right." I hung up the phone and stood there for a long moment, the weight of her words settling in. I didn't know what to do with this new information. Could Ethan really be searching for me? Or was this just another plea from someone who felt guilty about the role they played in the heartbreak I endured? I didn't know the answers, and maybe I didn't need to. For now, I was content with the life I was building, one where I was no longer defined by someone else's choices. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could face it on my own terms. And maybe, just maybe, I would learn to love myself again before I ever considered loving him. Chapter 4: The Return of the Past. The days after my conversation with Clara were filled with uncertainty. I kept myself busy with work at the bookstore, helping Mary organize the shelves and preparing for the upcoming book fair. Yet, in the quiet moments, my thoughts drifted back to Ethan. The weight of the unanswered questions hung over me like a shadow. What did he want? Was he truly searching for me, or was this some sort of guilt-driven attempt to reconcile the wrongs of the past? I tried to push these thoughts away, reminding myself that I had made my choice. I had walked away from my own peace, from my own sanity. And yet, every time I saw a man with a familiar gait or heard a voice that resembled his, my heart would skip a beat. The past wasn't easy to escape. Then, on a crisp evening, as I was leaving the bookstore, I saw him. Ethan was standing by the door of the cafe next to the bookstore, his back to me, staring out at the sea. He didn't see me at first, and I had a moment of clarity. I could turn around and walk away, leaving him behind like I had done before. But my feet seemed to move on their own accord, drawing me closer to him. As I approached, he turned around, his eyes locking with mine. There was a moment of silence, the world seeming to hold its breath. I couldn't decipher the look in his eyes, guilt, longing, sorrow, but it was enough to make my heart ache. Ava, he said my name like it was a question, a whisper on his lips, as if unsure if I was really standing in front of him. I didn't expect to see you here. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. What are you doing here, Ethan? He paused, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. I've been looking for you. I couldn't stay away. I needed to see you. I needed to apologize. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping me. Apologize? After everything that's happened, you think an apology will fix things? I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, he said quietly, his voice heavy with regret. But I can't live with myself knowing that I hurt you, that I lost you. The words hit me like a wave, crashing over me, and for a brief moment, I felt a flicker of hope. But just as quickly, the pain from the past came rushing back, drowning out everything else. I had given him my heart once, and he had thrown it away. I couldn't afford to make the same mistake again. You don't get it, Ethan, I said, my voice shaking, but with resolve. I left because I needed to. Because I couldn't keep living in the shadow of your past with Clara. You don't get to walk back into my life after everything. It doesn't work like that. His face fell, but he stepped closer, reaching out a hand as if to touch me. I instinctively took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't let him break me again. I know, he said softly. I know I don't have the right to ask anything of you. But I need you to know. I never stopped loving you. The words were like poison, sweet and deadly, filling my veins with warmth and pain all at once. I could feel myself weakening, my resolve slipping. The pull of our history, the memories of us, of the life we had once shared, it was all too much. But just as I was about to speak, a voice interrupted us. Ava? I turned to see a man standing at the entrance of the bookstore, his face familiar, yet unfamiliar at the same time. It was Daniel, the man I had met on my journey here, someone who had become a quiet comfort in my new life. He had been a friend, someone who had listened to me, helped me find my feet in this new town. But seeing him now, standing there, watching the scene unfold, made my heart skip a beat. What's going on? Daniel's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, as if he knew something was happening that I wasn't prepared for. I felt a knot tighten in my chest. Daniel's presence felt like an anchor, someone who was slowly becoming more than a friend, but someone I couldn't allow to be pulled into the chaos of my past. But then, I looked back at Ethan, standing there with his outstretched hand and pleading eyes, and something shifted inside me. This wasn't the man I had once loved. This wasn't the life I had dreamed of. I had moved on. I took a deep breath and stepped away from Ethan, walking toward Daniel. The relief I felt at the simple act of standing by his side was immediate. Ethan's eyes followed me, the hurt and confusion clear in his expression, but I couldn't look back. I couldn't. "I think it's time you leave, Ethan," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "We don't have a future together. Not anymore." Ethan stood still, as if he didn't know how to respond, his face a mixture of disbelief and heartache. And then, without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. I felt the weight of his departure press heavily on me, but it was also the beginning of something new. Something real. Daniel turned to me, his eyes soft with understanding. "Ava," he said quietly, his voice gentle. "You don't have to go through this alone." I looked up at him, my heart racing, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I realized something. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding. The past was behind me, and the future, though uncertain, was mine to shape. And just as I was about to respond, the world around me seemed to shift. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out. It was a message from an unknown number. "Ava, I need you to know the truth. I was forced into a situation I couldn't control, and I made choices I regret. The truth about Clara is not what you think." The message was cryptic, and my heart raced. What did it mean? What truth was he talking about? As I looked at Daniel, the reality of the situation hit me like a storm. There was more to Ethan's story, more than I had ever known. And suddenly, I realized that the past wasn't as simple as I had thought. There were more secrets, more lies waiting to be uncovered. And whether I was ready for it or not, I was about to find out the truth. Chapter 5, The Unraveling Truth. The message on my phone lingered in my hand, the words haunting me, "Ava, I need you to know the truth. I was forced into a situation I couldn't control, and I made choices I regret. The truth about Clara is not what you think." My thumb hovered over the screen, unsure whether to respond or let it be. But the pull of curiosity, the desire to know what had been hidden from me for so long, outweighed the caution I'd promised myself. "I'll explain everything soon," I whispered to myself as I typed a short response. What truth? I pressed send before my heart could catch up with my thoughts. Daniel, still standing beside me, watched me with a quiet concern in his eyes, sensing the shift in the air. He was patient, allowing me to work through my emotions, but I could see that he, too, was waiting for the storm that was about to break. "You okay?" he asked softly, his hand brushing against mine. There was something comforting in his touch, something that made me feel grounded in this moment. I forced a smile. "I think so. I need to figure this out. It's not over. I thought it was, but it's not." Daniel's eyes darkened with understanding, but he didn't press me further. Instead, he gently squeezed my hand. "You don't have to do this alone, Ava. Whatever it is, I'm here." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed again. The message was from the same unknown number, and this time, the words felt more urgent. "Meet me tomorrow at the old warehouse by the docks. The truth about Clara and Ethan is waiting. You'll understand everything." My breath caught in my throat. The docks. The warehouse. It was a place I had passed by countless times, never thinking twice about it. But now, it felt like the center of some twisted, dark mystery that I wasn't prepared to confront. "I don't know if I should go," I murmured, the conflict evident in my voice. Daniel leaned in closer, his face a mixture of concern and protectiveness. "Ava, be careful. This could be a trap. Whoever this is, they're playing games." "I have to go," I said, the decision solidifying in my mind. "I need answers. I need to know what Ethan didn't tell me. What Clara didn't tell me. I can't keep living in the dark." Daniel's expression faltered for a moment, a flicker of hesitation crossing his face. I'll go with you. I don't trust this. Not without you having someone by your side. For a moment, I considered his offer. Having Daniel with me, someone who I could trust, would make facing whatever awaited at the warehouse a little less terrifying. But then, the reality of what I might uncover sank in. This wasn't just about Ethan. It wasn't just about Clara. This was about me reclaiming my own narrative, understanding the choices I had made, and figuring out how to move forward. No, I said, shaking my head. I appreciate it, Daniel. But I need to do this alone. I need to face this on my own terms. I need to find my own closure. Daniel seemed torn, but he respected my decision. He nodded quietly, his expression softening. All right, but promise me you'll be careful. I promise. The following evening, I drove to the docks, my hands gripping the steering wheel as anxiety churned in my stomach. The familiar streets felt alien, the shadows of the night stretching longer than usual. When I reached the old warehouse, my headlights illuminated its decaying exterior, the rusted metal door hanging off its hinges like the forgotten remnants of a past life. I parked my car at a distance, hesitating before stepping out. The air was thick with the smell of salt water and decay, and the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore seemed to echo the tumult in my chest. I approached the warehouse cautiously, my footsteps muffled against the damp ground. The door creaked open when I pushed it, and I stepped inside. The space was vast and eerily quiet, save for the occasional sound of water dripping from the ceiling. The faint glow of a single light bulb hung above the center of the room, casting long shadows against the cracked concrete floor. Then, I saw him. Ethan. He stood there, his back to me, his silhouette outlined by the dim light. My breath caught in my throat. My heart raced, a mixture of emotions flooding me, anger, confusion, pain. But as he turned to face me, I saw the raw vulnerability in his eyes, something I hadn't seen in years. I knew you'd come, he said quietly, his voice trembling. I didn't want you to find out like this, but there's no other way. There are things you need to know. Things I've been keeping from you. From everyone. I crossed my arms, my stance defensive. What is it, Ethan? What's the truth? He stepped closer, his expression pained. Clara, she wasn't just my ex. She was involved in something dangerous. Something I never wanted you to be part of. My mind spun with the implications. What are you talking about? What does Clara have to do with any of this? Ethan took a deep breath, his eyes filled with guilt. She was working with my father. They were using me. Manipulating me. I was forced to be with her, Ava. I was never given a choice. She knew about my family's connections, and she used that to trap me. I shook my head in disbelief. That's insane. If that's true, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you leave her? I couldn't, he whispered, his voice breaking. Because she had something on me. She knew things about my past, about things I've done. I thought if I stayed with her, kept her happy, I could protect you. I could protect us. But I was wrong. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me, and I spun around, heart racing. The figure emerging from the shadows wasn't who I expected. It was Clara, but she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a man I didn't recognize, but the cold, calculating look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. Clara smiled faintly, her eyes filled with malice. You really think you can escape, Ava? This has been set in motion for a long time. You think Ethan's the only one with secrets? No. You've just stepped into a game that you don't understand. And now, you're in the middle of it. Before I could respond, the man beside Clara stepped forward, his hand reaching for the pocket of his coat. The air was thick with tension as my instincts screamed at me to run. But then, Clara's words echoed in my mind. You think Ethan's the only one with secrets? Suddenly, it wasn't just Ethan's betrayal that was at play. It wasn't just Clara. I was about to uncover a web of lies far deeper than I ever could have imagined. And the truth, well, it was far more dangerous than I had ever prepared for. Chapter 6, The Web of Deceit. My heart pounded in my chest as Clara stepped further into the dim light, her smile unsettlingly calm. The man next to her remained silent, but the tension in the air was palpable. My breath quickened as I glanced between Ethan and Clara, trying to make sense of everything that had been revealed in the past few minutes. "Ethan," I said, my voice trembling. You were lying to me the whole time?" Ethan lowered his head, his face crumpling with regret. "I never wanted to lie to you, Ava. But I was trapped. They made sure I couldn't get out of it. I didn't know who to trust anymore. Not even myself." I felt a surge of anger, but it was accompanied by an overwhelming sadness. This wasn't just about Ethan anymore. It was about betrayal on a scale I never imagined. Clara, the woman I thought was just a shadow from Ethan's past, was part of a larger conspiracy, a conspiracy that had been playing out behind my back for months, maybe even years. Clara's eyes glinted with something dark, and her voice was cold as she spoke. "You think you're the only one who's been manipulated?" "No, Ava. Your perfect little life? It was all part of a bigger plan. A plan that involves you, too." I stared at her, confusion rising. "What are you talking about? What do I have to do with this?" Clara chuckled, a hollow sound that sent chills down my spine. "You were always a pawn in this game, Ava. Your marriage to Ethan, your position in his life, it was never about love. It was about keeping you in the dark while I worked behind the scenes. While we worked behind the scenes." My world spun as the implications of her words began to sink in. The betrayal wasn't just Ethan's. It wasn't just Clara's. It was all of them, every part of it, my life, my relationship, my entire world, had been manipulated from the very beginning. And the worst part? I had no idea. Ethan took a step toward me, his face filled with desperation. "Ava, you have to understand." But Clara interrupted, her voice sharp and final. "Enough, Ethan." She turned to me, her smile wicked. "Do you really think he's the only one with secrets? The man you think you love is nothing more than a puppet. And you, Ava, you've been a pawn all along." My pulse raced as I tried to make sense of her words. Clara wasn't just bitter. She wasn't just trying to tear us apart out of jealousy. No, she was trying to break me, to make me question everything I thought I knew about myself, about Ethan, about everything. Before I could respond, the man beside Clara stepped forward, his eyes scanning me with a predatory interest. His presence was unnerving, and I immediately felt a cold knot of fear in my stomach. "Ava," he said, his voice low and menacing, "you're here for more than just the truth, aren't you? You think you can walk away from this? Think again." I took a step back, my mind racing. "Who are you? What do you want with me?" Clara's laugh echoed in the silence, and the man smirked. "We have much more planned for you than you realize. Ethan wasn't the only one with secrets. And you, Ava, you're going to help us expose them." The weight of her words hit me like a punch. There was something far bigger at play here than I could comprehend. Something that was far more dangerous than anything I could have prepared for. And I was now caught in the middle of it. I turned to Ethan, hoping for some kind of explanation, but his face was twisted in guilt, unable to offer me any comfort. He had failed me. In the worst way possible. And Clara knew it. "I won't be part of this," I said, my voice trembling but determined. "You can't control me. I won't help you hurt anyone." Clara stepped closer, her eyes burning with malice. "Oh, but you already are. Whether you want to be or not." With that, she turned and gestured for the man to follow her. "We'll be in touch, Ava. This is just the beginning." I watched them leave, a feeling of dread settling in my chest. They had just shown me a glimpse of something far darker than I could have ever imagined. And I realized, in that moment, that nothing was what it seemed. That night, I barely slept. The truth I had uncovered was far too overwhelming. The pieces of my life, my marriage, my relationship with Ethan, were now scattered across the floor like shards of glass. I couldn't make sense of it. I couldn't find a way to put it all back together. But I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't stay in the dark any longer. I had to find out what Clara and the man were really after. What their plans were for me. I couldn't just walk away from this. If I did, I would be giving up the chance to reclaim my life, my power. I needed to find answers. The only way forward was to face the truth, no matter how twisted or painful it might be. And this time, I wouldn't let Ethan, or anyone else, dictate the path I would take. The next morning, I contacted Daniel, needing someone I could trust. I explained the bare minimum of what had happened, leaving out most of the dark details. He didn't need to know everything, not yet. But he deserved to know enough to understand why I couldn't go through this alone. "Ava, I'm with you, no matter what," Daniel said, his voice steady, yet filled with concern. "But you have to be careful. This isn't just about Ethan or Clara. There's more at play here. I can feel it." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "I know. But I have no choice. I have to uncover what they're hiding. I need to understand why they're using me. And how deep this really goes." Daniel agreed to help me, but he also made one thing clear: promise me you won't take unnecessary risks. "I'll be with you every step of the way, but you have to promise me that you won't put yourself in danger for this." "I promise," I said, the resolve in my voice stronger than before. But as I made that promise, a nagging thought gnawed at the back of my mind. What if the danger was already closer than I realized? What if this was just the beginning of something much darker? The truth was, I didn't know what would happen next. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going down without a fight. Chapter 7, The Shattered Illusions. The days following that encounter with Clara and her mysterious companion felt like they were spiraling out of control. I was trapped in a web of lies, and the more I uncovered, the more entangled I became. Ethan's betrayal weighed heavily on me, but the dark secrets Clara hinted at loomed even larger. I couldn't ignore the feeling that something more sinister was at play. Daniel kept in touch, offering his support as I dove deeper into the mystery. He had pulled some strings and managed to get access to a few of Clara's background details, things she hadn't wanted anyone to know. The more we dug, the more disturbing it became. Clara had ties to a powerful underground network, and it wasn't just about manipulating people like Ethan, it was much bigger. There were whispers of illegal dealings, corruption, and people who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. I could feel the walls closing in around me. As the days turned into weeks, I spent every waking moment trying to piece together the puzzle. But no matter how many times I went over the events, one question kept nagging at me: why me? Why had Clara, and the man with her, chosen to involve me in their plans? What role did I play in all of this? I had to find out. It was a late evening when I received an anonymous letter. The envelope was plain, with no return address, and it carried an unmistakable sense of urgency. Inside was a single piece of paper with a single sentence written in neat, precise handwriting. "You're closer to the truth than you realize. The next move is yours." I stared at the words for a long time, my mind racing. Who had sent this? Was it a warning? Or was it a clue? I thought of Clara and the man she was working with. Had they sent this, or was it someone else, someone who had been watching from the shadows? I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was manipulating the situation from behind the scenes, playing all of us like pawns in a much larger game. But whose game was it? And what was I meant to do with this cryptic message? I made a decision that night. I would confront Clara again. It was the only way to get answers. But this time, I wouldn't go in blindly. I needed leverage. I needed something she couldn't ignore. The following day, I spent hours reviewing every scrap of information I had gathered about Clara. It was all leading to one thing: a meeting. A meeting that had been set up months ago, under the guise of a charity event. It was clear now that it had been a setup, an opportunity to bring everyone involved under one roof. I had to go. When I arrived at the venue, I was surprised by how ordinary it looked. A simple conference room in an upscale hotel. Nothing about it screamed conspiracy. But as I entered, I could feel the tension in the air. There were people I didn't recognize, sitting in the shadows, their eyes flicking toward me as I walked in. Clara was already there, sitting at the head of the table. She was wearing her usual cold smile, but her eyes betrayed her. There was a flicker of unease behind the mask of confidence. Well, Ava," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I didn't expect to see you here. Don't you have enough to deal with already?" I stood tall, my heart racing but my resolve stronger than ever. "I'm here to put an end to this game, Clara. I want the truth. All of it. Why me? Why was I dragged into this?" Clara's smile faltered, and for a brief moment, I saw the mask slip. She didn't expect me to be so direct. But then, just as quickly, her composure returned. "You think you're in control here, don't you, Ava?" she said, her voice laced with bitterness. "You think you can just waltz in and demand answers? You have no idea what you're dealing with." I leaned forward, my voice steady but unwavering. "Then enlighten me. Because I'm done playing games. If you want me to disappear from your life, I need to know the full truth." For a moment, Clara didn't respond. The room felt suffocating as the silence stretched on, but then, she spoke again, her voice quieter this time, as if she were weighing her options. "It's not just about you, Ava," she said, her tone taking on a darker edge. "It's about control. Power. Everything you've been told, everything you've believed, is a lie. You're just another piece on the board. And now, you're playing the game whether you want to or not." I swallowed hard, but I refused to back down. "Then tell me what I'm really a part of, Clara. Because I'm done being a pawn." Clara's lips twisted into a smile that sent a chill down my spine. "You really want to know, don't you? Fine. You've been part of this since the very beginning. Oscar wasn't the only one being controlled. You were always meant to be a part of this, meant to help bring everything together." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "What do you mean? What do you want from me?" Clara chuckled, her voice low and venomous. "You think Oscar was the only one with secrets? Think again. He's been working for us this entire time. But you? You're the key to everything. Your loyalty, your trust in him, that's what makes you so valuable. You have the power to destroy everything, if you want to." My mind was racing, and the weight of her words hit me like a slap. Oscar, my husband, he had been a part of this all along. Not just a victim of Clara's manipulation, but an active participant. And I was the one who had been blind to it. Clara's grin widened as she leaned in closer. "It's time you chose a side, Ava. There's no turning back now." I looked at her, my heart pounding. "I don't choose sides. I choose to end this, once and for all." With that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving Clara's laughter echoing behind me. I knew now that the path ahead was fraught with danger. But there was no going back. The game was on, and I would play it until the end. I wasn't just going to survive this, I was going to make sure they paid for what they had done. All of them. Chapter 8, The Reckoning. The days after that confrontation felt like a blur. Clara's words echoed in my mind, each one unraveling the threads of my reality. Oscar had been involved all along. The man I had trusted, the one I thought I knew so well, was a part of a much darker world. A world I never could have imagined. I could no longer look at him the same way. My heart ached with the weight of betrayal, but there was no time to mourn it. There was only one thing on my mind now: how to take back control. I spent the next few days in seclusion, piecing together every detail. I knew I had to confront Oscar, but I couldn't do it without leverage. I needed to understand just how deep his involvement went and what, if anything, he truly knew. He had kept so many secrets from me, but now it was time for me to turn the tables. I enlisted Daniel's help. He was becoming more than just an ally in this mess. He had proven time and again that he could be trusted. His resources were invaluable. Through him, I managed to get a hold of some confidential files that connected Oscar to a series of shady deals and high-profile people who had no qualms about destroying anyone who got in their way. Clara's underground network was just the tip of the iceberg. I felt the pressure mounting, but I also felt something else: power. I was no longer a passive player in this game. The pieces were falling into place, and I was ready to make my next move. Oscar finally returned home one evening, his demeanor tense, his eyes avoiding mine. The air between us was thick with unspoken words. But I wasn't going to wait for him to speak first. I had spent enough time in silence. "Sit down, Oscar," I said, my voice colder than I intended. He hesitated for a moment but eventually complied. He sank into the chair across from me, his eyes still darting around the room, clearly avoiding the confrontation. But I wasn't about to let him get away with it this time. "I know what you've been doing," I said, watching as the color drained from his face. He froze, his body tense as if bracing for an impact. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out the files Daniel had given me, placing them in front of him. "You think you can hide behind lies and manipulation, Oscar? That you can keep me in the dark while you play everyone around you?" Oscar's face flushed with a mix of guilt and anger. "You don't know what you're talking about, Ava. This isn't what you think." But I wasn't buying it. "Then explain it to me. Explain why you've been hiding things from me, why you've been so involved with people like Clara and those others. What's your game, Oscar?" He stood abruptly, pacing the room in agitation. "I never wanted this for you. I never wanted you to be part of this world. But you have to understand, I had no choice. I was protecting you." "Protecting me?" I echoed, incredulous. "By lying to me? By being involved in God knows what kind of deals and deceit? What kind of protection is that?" His voice trembled as he spoke, a flicker of desperation crossing his features. "I thought I could shield you from the truth, but I can't anymore. The people I've been dealing with, they don't just walk away from things like this. If I leave, if I try to get out, they'll come after you. They'll come after everything we've built." I felt a pang in my chest, but I couldn't let myself be swayed. "Not anymore. So you thought the best way to protect me was to let me live in the dark? To let me remain ignorant to everything you've been doing?" He stopped pacing and faced me, his eyes desperate. "I never wanted this life for you, Ava. But you're already involved. You've been involved from the moment you became my wife. And now, you have to decide if you want to keep living in this lie, or if you want to help me fix it." I stood up, my own anger and confusion rising. "Fix it? Oscar, this isn't something you can fix. You've built your life on secrets, and now it's all falling apart. You can't just pretend it didn't happen." There was a long silence between us, a heavy weight that neither of us could lift. For the first time, I saw the cracks in his armor, the vulnerability he had been hiding for so long. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for me to forget everything he had kept from me. "Don't you see, Oscar?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending everything's okay when it's not." "I'll fix it," he said, his voice full of conviction. "I'll make things right. I swear, I'll do whatever it takes to get us out of this." But I wasn't so sure anymore. Oscar's words, while sincere, couldn't undo the damage. The betrayal, the lies, the people involved, it was too much for me to ignore. The truth was, I didn't know if I could ever trust him again. "Maybe it's too late," I murmured, my voice breaking. Oscar's face crumpled as he realized what I meant. "No. No, Ava, don't say that. Please. We can fix this." But it was already too late. I had already made up my mind. There was no going back. I couldn't stay with him, not when I knew the truth. And so, I walked out of that room, leaving Oscar behind, lost in his own guilt and confusion. The game was over. And so was my marriage. Later that night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of everything I had learned hit me all at once. I was free, but I was also lost. The world I had known was gone, and in its place, there was only uncertainty. But I wasn't going to let fear control me. I had come this far. I had taken back my power. Now, it was time to rebuild, and this time, I was going to do it on my own terms. Oscar had made his choice. And now, so had I. Chapter 9, The Unexpected Twist. The days that followed felt like I was walking in a fog. The aftermath of leaving Oscar had left me in a state of numbness, but there was a lingering sense of relief. For the first time in years, I could breathe without the weight of betrayal hanging over me. Still, I knew that nothing was truly as simple as it seemed. I moved out of the house, leaving behind the life we had once shared. I found a small apartment in the city, a place I could call my own, where I could start fresh. But the peace I sought was short-lived. My phone buzzed late one evening, a message from an unknown number. "Ava, we need to talk." It was from Oscar. I ignored it at first, but the message haunted me. What did he want now? Was this just another attempt to drag me back into the tangled web of lies? After all, he'd been so desperate to fix things, to make me believe that we could move past all the secrets. But I wasn't so sure anymore. I didn't respond right away, but as the days went on, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was something more to his message. There had to be. After everything he'd done, after everything he'd kept from me, what was left to say? One evening, I decided to meet him. Not for reconciliation, but for closure. I had to know the truth, all of it. When I arrived at the quiet cafe he had suggested, I saw him sitting at a corner table, his face drawn and tired. He looked nothing like the man I had once married, no longer the confident, almost cocky version of Oscar who had swept me off my feet. Now, he looked like a man who had lost everything. I took a seat across from him, my eyes searching his face for any sign of what he was about to say. "I'm not here to beg, Ava," he said quietly, his voice hoarse. "I just need you to understand something. Something that I couldn't tell you before." I raised an eyebrow, my heart pounding. "What is it?" He took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he folded them in front of him. "The truth is, I wasn't the only one involved in this mess. There's someone else behind all of it. Someone who was controlling everything." My pulse quickened. "Who?" "Oscar, what are you talking about?" He leaned forward, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and urgency. "It's not just Clara. It's someone more dangerous. Someone I've been working for, and I never had a choice in the matter. The people you think are just part of a small group, they're connected to a much bigger network. And I didn't want you to get involved, but by marrying me, you did." I felt a chill run through me. "What are you saying? You've been working for someone? You've been controlled this whole time?" Oscar nodded, his expression filled with guilt and regret. "Yes. And now they know you're involved. They're not going to let you go. They won't stop until they get what they want, and they'll use you to get it." I froze, trying to process what he was telling me. "And what do they want?" "I don't know yet," Oscar admitted. "But I'm trying to find out. That's why I'm here. I'm begging you to trust me, Ava. I made a mistake, but I'm not the villain in this story. I never wanted any of this for you. For us." I sat back, my mind racing. The whole time, Oscar had been caught in something far bigger than I could have ever imagined. But even as he spoke, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. How could I trust him again? How could I trust anyone in this world of shadows and lies? "I don't know if I can trust you anymore, Oscar," I said softly, my voice steady but filled with a deep sadness. "I don't know if I can trust anyone. You've lied to me, and now you're telling me there are even bigger lies to uncover?" He reached for my hand, his grip firm but pleading. "I'm sorry, Ava. Please. Don't shut me out. Let me help you. Let me fix this before it's too late." I pulled my hand away, standing up from the table. "It's too late for us, Oscar. I don't know if I can fix anything anymore. You've brought me into a world I never wanted to be a part of." I turned to walk away, but his voice stopped me. "Don't walk away from me. Not again. You don't know what's coming. Please, just trust me." Let me protect you. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Trust had been broken. The man I had loved was no longer the person standing before me. I didn't know who he was anymore, and I certainly didn't know what he was truly capable of. Over the next few days, I started to feel the weight of Oscar's warning. I couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was lurking just beneath the surface. The network he had spoken of wasn't just a metaphor, it was real, and it was dangerous. And somehow, I had been drawn into it. The strange phone calls began shortly after. Unfamiliar voices, heavy breathing, cryptic messages that warned me to stay out of things. I started to feel paranoid, like I was being watched at every turn. But I couldn't afford to back down. I had already come this far, and I wasn't about to let fear control me. I reached out to Daniel, my only ally in all of this, and together, we began piecing together the puzzle. The more we uncovered, the more I realized just how deep this went. It wasn't just about Oscar or Clara anymore. This was about power, money, and influence, forces far beyond what I could have imagined. And now, they were coming for me. But I was done running. It was time to take control. No more secrets. No more lies. I was going to fight back, no matter what it took. Oscar had warned me, but I was no longer the woman he had married. I was stronger now, and I would not let anyone destroy what I had worked so hard to rebuild. And if it meant going up against everything I once knew, so be it. Chapter 10, Unraveling the Truth. The days after my conversation with Oscar felt like they were happening in fast forward. I couldn't shake the unease, the gnawing feeling that something dark was closing in on me. The calls kept coming, but now they were different. Not just cryptic threats, but direct demands. Stop digging, Ava. You don't know what you're getting into. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but there was something cold about it, something that sent a shiver down my spine. I hung up before they could say more, but I knew they wouldn't stop. I had already been dragged into something bigger than I ever imagined, and now there was no way out. I called Daniel, my only ally in this tangled mess. He had always been there for me, even before Oscar's betrayal. He picked up on the first ring. Ava? You okay? You've been quiet. I don't know, I replied, my voice shaky. This isn't just about Oscar or Clara anymore. There are people involved, people who are dangerous. I need your help. We need to get to the bottom of this. There was a pause on the other end. All right. What do you need me to do? I need to find out everything I can about Oscar's past, his business dealings, and anyone connected to him. There are people threatening me, Daniel. I don't know who to trust. You can trust me, Ava, he said firmly. I'll help you figure this out. I've got some contacts who might know more. The weight of everything pressing down on me lifted slightly. Daniel was someone I could rely on. At least for now. In the days that followed, Daniel and I worked tirelessly, combing through every shred of information we could find. He had access to a network of contacts in various industries, people who owed him favors. Slowly, piece by piece, we started to unravel Oscar's past. It wasn't pretty. Oscar had always been the charming, confident man, the one everyone loved to be around. But what I didn't know was how deeply he had been involved in some questionable business ventures. His connections weren't just limited to real estate or minor investments. He had dealings with powerful figures in the underground world of organized crime, drug lords, and arms dealers. The deeper we dug, the more it became clear that Oscar's involvement in this dark world was far from accidental. He had been groomed for this life, caught up in a world of power and corruption that he couldn't escape. But why hadn't he told me? I was sitting at my kitchen table one night, a pile of documents and printouts spread out before me when Daniel called. His voice was urgent. Ava, I found something. You need to see this. I grabbed my coat and rushed to meet him. When I arrived at his place, he had a thick file in front of him, papers strewn across the table. I went through his records, Daniel said, sliding a folder towards me. These are bank statements, transaction records, and names I dug up. Some of the people he's worked with, they're not people you want to mess with. I flipped through the pages quickly, my eyes scanning the names and figures. One name in particular stood out, Victor Reyes. A name I had heard whispered in the shadows of the city, known for his ruthless control over illegal businesses. Daniel leaned in. Reyes is the key. Oscar's been doing business with him for years. He's been forced to, Ava. There's no way he got involved on his own. Reyes has dirt on him, stuff that could destroy him. I felt a knot form in my stomach. And Oscar never told me about any of this? Daniel shook his head. No. He was trying to protect you from the mess he was tangled in. But now, this mess is coming for you. It was a harsh truth, but it was one I had to face. Oscar's lies had run deeper than I ever imagined. His love for me was real, but it had been overshadowed by the dangerous world he had become a part of. And now, that world was threatening to consume both of us. I looked at Daniel. What do we do now? We go after Reyes, he said without hesitation. If we can take him down, we can stop everything from spiraling out of control. I hesitated. But how? He's untouchable. Daniel smirked, a glint of determination in his eyes. You're forgetting one thing. I don't go into this without a plan. We're going to need to be smart about it. The next few days were a blur of preparations. Daniel had his contacts in place, and together, we started devising a strategy. We knew it wouldn't be easy. Victor Reyes wasn't just a criminal, he was a mastermind. But there had to be a way to expose him, to bring him down without getting ourselves killed in the process. Oscar hadn't reached out to me again since our meeting, but I knew he was somewhere, lurking in the shadows, trying to figure out how to salvage whatever he could of his life. But as much as I cared for him, I couldn't afford to let him pull me back in. This was my fight now. I had to make a decision. I had already lost too much to go back to that life. No matter how deep my feelings for Oscar ran, I couldn't let him drag me into his chaos again. But there was one thing I still had to do. Before we could make any moves on Reyes, I needed to confront Oscar one last time. I tracked Oscar down to a small, run-down bar on the outskirts of the city. When he saw me, his face was a mixture of guilt and desperation. I didn't want this, Ava, he said, his voice hoarse. I never wanted any of this to happen. But now, it's too late. I've lost you. I've lost everything. You've been lying to me for so long, Oscar. I don't know who you are anymore. But what I do know is that I can't be a part of your world. I can't be a part of this mess, I said, my voice steady but filled with sorrow. Oscar reached for me, his eyes pleading. I never wanted to pull you into this, Ava. But now, please, I need you to understand. I'm trying to make things right. I'm trying to fix this. I shook my head. I don't think you can fix anything. Not this time. And I don't want to be caught in your web anymore. Oscar's face crumpled, the facade of confidence he had once worn slipping away. Then I guess this is goodbye. I turned and walked away, my heart heavy with the weight of everything we had been through. But this was the only way forward. The battle was far from over, but I had made my decision. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to fight for my future, one that didn't include Oscar, or the darkness that had followed him into my life. Chapter 11, The Web Titans. The days following my final confrontation with Oscar were filled with tension. I had severed my ties with him, but the world I had entered through him hadn't loosened its grip on me. As much as I wanted to move on, the forces surrounding Oscar and the business he had been involved in still had their eyes on me. Daniel and I were ready. We had been preparing for this moment for weeks, gathering intel, reaching out to people who could help us infiltrate Victor Reyes' network. But every step forward seemed to pull me deeper into a maze of danger. I had no illusions about what I was walking into. Reyes wasn't just a man, he was a criminal empire, and I was about to challenge it head-on. We met at a safe house one night, going over the final details. Daniel was working on an informant who could get us closer to Reyes' operations, someone who knew the inner workings of his empire. I had to admit, I was nervous, but there was no turning back now. "We're close, Ava," Daniel said, his face grim. "We can take down Reyes, but it's going to be dangerous. There's no way we can do this without causing some noise." "I know," I replied, my voice firm. "But I can't let them win. Not after everything they've done." Daniel paused, his eyes flickering with concern. "Are you sure about this? You've been through so much already. This isn't just about Oscar anymore." "I'm sure," I said, my determination hardening. "This is about my future now. About putting an end to everything that's been haunting me." The plan was simple, at least on paper. We would use the informant to get close to Reyes, find a way to get him out in the open, and expose his criminal empire. But as we moved forward, I began to sense that something was off. Every move we made seemed to be anticipated, as if someone was always one step ahead of us. The first sign of trouble came when we met the informant. He was supposed to be a reliable source, someone who could provide us with critical information about Reyes' next move. But when we arrived at the designated meeting spot, the alley was empty. There was no sign of him. "Where is he?" Daniel muttered, scanning the shadows. "He should have been here by now." I felt a chill run down my spine. Something wasn't right. As we started to turn back, a car screeched around the corner, headlights blinding us. Before I could react, a group of masked men poured out, surrounding us. I instinctively stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. "You're not getting away this time," one of the men said, his voice cold. I realized then that we had been set up. The informant had betrayed us, or worse, he had never been on our side to begin with. I grabbed Daniel's arm, pulling him back. "We need to go. Now." We turned and ran, but the men were quick. A few shots rang out, narrowly missing us as we sprinted through the maze of alleyways. My breath was coming in sharp gasps, adrenaline flooding my system. We couldn't outrun them forever. Just when I thought we were cornered, a familiar voice echoed from behind us. "Get in. Oscar." He had shown up, seemingly out of nowhere, a car idling in the street. He threw open the door and gestured for us to get in. "Hurry up." I hesitated, looking at Daniel, but there was no time to debate. We had no choice. I threw myself into the back seat, Daniel following closely behind. Oscar slammed the door shut, and the car sped off. I could feel Daniel's eyes on me, his questions unspoken. But I didn't have the answers. I didn't know why Oscar had come to our rescue, or if I could even trust him anymore. "We're not out of the woods yet," Oscar said, his voice low. "But I can help you. We can bring Reyes down together." I turned to face him, my thoughts racing. Why now? Why help us after everything that's happened? Oscar's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Because this isn't just about you, Ava. It's about saving myself too. Reyes isn't just some criminal. He's got ties to people I care about. If we don't take him down now, everything we've been through will have been for nothing." I glanced at Daniel, whose expression mirrored my own confusion. But the situation was too dire to question Oscar's motives. We had no other choice but to accept his help. The next few days were a blur of planning and strategizing. Oscar had the resources we needed, contacts, information, and access to people who could help us get to Reyes. But as we delved deeper into the plan, something still didn't feel right. Oscar was playing a dangerous game. He was caught between his past and present, between his guilt and his desire for redemption. I could see the conflict in his eyes, but I also saw something else, a determination to fix what he had broken, even if it meant making sacrifices. I wasn't sure if I could forgive him. I wasn't sure if I even wanted to. But right now, we had a common goal. Reyes had to be taken down, no matter the cost. The night of the operation arrived. Everything had been set in motion. We had an insider within Reyes' organization, someone who could get us into his inner circle. Oscar had arranged for us to meet Reyes at a secluded location, a meeting that could potentially expose his criminal operations to the authorities. But as we made our way to the meeting point, I realized that Oscar had one more secret he had kept from me. The person working with us wasn't just any insider. It was Clara, the woman I thought had been fading away from our lives. She was working with Oscar all along. The realization hit me like a slap to the face. Clara was never just a victim. She had been playing a part in this twisted game too. And now, she was part of the plan to bring down Reyes. But her motives were unclear. Was she seeking revenge on Oscar? Or was she trying to protect him, just like he had tried to protect me? As the car slowed to a stop near the meeting point, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The pieces were all coming together, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being led into a trap. The darkness that surrounded Oscar, Clara, and Reyes was closing in. And I had no idea how much more I could take before everything shattered. Chapter 12, The Deceit Unfolds. The car came to a stop, the engine's hum the only sound in the tense silence that had fallen between us. Oscar, Clara, and I stood on the precipice of something much larger than we had initially anticipated. This was no longer about exposing Reyes, it was about survival. Oscar's face was hard, his eyes focused on the dimly lit warehouse in front of us. Clara, sitting beside him, hadn't said a word since the shocking revelation of her involvement in the plan. Her eyes were cast downward, a storm brewing behind them that I couldn't decipher. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me. This wasn't a simple operation anymore, this was a game of high stakes, where every wrong move could cost us everything. "We need to move fast," Oscar muttered, gripping the steering wheel. "Clara's got the intel, and we're already late. Reyes won't wait for us forever." Clara nodded, though she still didn't meet my eyes. I wasn't sure what to make of her, but there was no time for questions now. We had a window of opportunity, and I had to take it. "Stay close to me," Oscar said, his voice low but firm. He was now fully in control, and his familiar leadership was both comforting and unnerving. This was the man I had once trusted with everything, yet here he was, leading us deeper into a world of danger and deception. We exited the car and made our way toward the warehouse. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and every step I took felt heavier than the last. I didn't want to admit it, but I could feel the fear creeping up my spine. What if this was all a trap? What if Oscar had been manipulating me all along? Oscar's hand brushed mine as we walked, and I jerked my hand away instinctively. He caught my gaze, his expression unreadable. "We'll get through this," he said softly, though the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. I wanted to believe him. I needed to. The door to the warehouse creaked open, and we stepped inside. The dim light illuminated stacks of crates and shadows that seemed to move on their own. I strained my ears, listening for any sign of Reyes, but all I could hear was the distant sound of machinery humming, and the occasional echo of our footsteps. Clara moved ahead of us, gliding silently through the darkness. Her presence was unnerving, but she knew this place better than anyone. She had been inside Reyes' organization for too long. "This is it," Clara whispered, stopping in front of a door at the back of the warehouse. "Reyes will be here in 10 minutes. We need to be in position by then." Oscar nodded, and I followed him as we took up positions behind some crates. My pulse raced as I crouched low, waiting for the moment when everything would unfold. The minutes seemed to stretch on endlessly, the silence of the warehouse amplifying every breath, every heartbeat. I was hyper-aware of my surroundings, the shadows that seemed to shift just out of sight. Every creak, every rustle, made me jump. Then, a faint sound, footsteps, approaching slowly. Oscar's hand shot out, grabbing mine in a tight grip. "Stay calm," he whispered, his voice a low command. The door opened, and 2 figures emerged from the shadows. Reyes. His presence was unmistakable, tall, broad-shouldered, with a cold, calculating air. The man exuded power, and as he stepped into the room, his eyes swept over the area, assessing the situation with military precision. Beside him stood someone I didn't expect, Clara's brother, Julian. I froze. Oscar's grip tightened on my hand as he watched the scene unfold. Julian and Clara exchanged a tense glance, and for the first time since I had met her, I saw the true depth of betrayal in her eyes. She hadn't just been working with Oscar, she had been playing both sides, using us to get closer to Reyes and his empire. "Did you think you could outsmart me, Clara?" Reyes' voice rang out, sharp and threatening. Clara didn't flinch. "I've been outsmarting you since day one, Reyes. You're just too blinded by your own ego to realize it." Oscar stepped forward, his presence now undeniable. "We're here to end this, Reyes," he said, his voice steady, but I could hear the simmering rage beneath it. Reyes smirked, a cold, calculated smile. "I don't think you're in any position to make demands, Oscar. You're the one who's been playing catch-up all along. You and your little crew." Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind us, and we were surrounded. More of Reyes' men had entered, and the room now felt like a cage. "Why don't you both put your guns down?" Reyes said, his voice dripping with amusement. "It's over." I could feel the tension in the air, the inevitability of our failure weighing down on me. Oscar had led us here, but he had miscalculated. Reyes had always been one step ahead, and now we were trapped in the lion's den. But then, in a swift motion, Clara turned on her brother. "Get down," she shouted, and in an instant, a gunshot rang through the warehouse. Julian collapsed, his face twisted in shock. Oscar dove for cover as more gunfire erupted. Chaos erupted around us, men shouting, scrambling for weapons. Clara's betrayal had detonated a powder keg. I didn't have time to process the confusion. Oscar was already pulling me along, guiding me through the labyrinth of crates. We were running for our lives, the weight of the betrayal and the gunfire making every moment feel like a nightmare. "Go!" Oscar shouted, pushing me toward a hidden exit at the back of the warehouse. We were running blind now, unsure of where we were going or how we were going to survive. I wanted to ask him what had happened, what had gone wrong, but there was no time for questions. We were running from a man who had once been our enemy, but now, he was the only one I had left to trust. It wasn't until we reached the safety of the car that I could catch my breath. Oscar's eyes were wild, his hands shaking as he slammed the door shut and started the engine. "That was too close," he muttered, his voice hoarse. I stared at him, my heart still racing from the terror of it all. The betrayal, the chaos, the bloodshed, it was overwhelming. "I need to know what's going on, Oscar," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Who can I trust anymore?" Oscar's face hardened, and for the first time, I saw the full weight of his guilt. "You can trust me," he said, though the words sounded empty, even to him. "I'm trying to fix this. But you need to understand, Ava, this isn't just about me. It's about all of us. And if we don't end this, no one's going to walk away from this alive." As we sped into the night, the road ahead uncertain, I realized that we were no longer just trying to take down Reyes. We were part of something much bigger, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. The night air was thick with the smell of gasoline and fear. Oscar's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, but his eyes remained fixed ahead, unwavering. I could feel the intensity of his concentration, but there was something else behind it, something darker. The chaos from the warehouse was still fresh in my mind. Clara's betrayal had shifted everything in an instant. She wasn't just playing both sides, she was part of something far bigger, something I had yet to fully understand. She had turned against her own brother, Julian, and in doing so, had sealed our fates in a way none of us had anticipated. "We need to figure out what to do next," Oscar said, breaking the tense silence. His voice was low, strained. "Reyes is going to come after us, and this time, we won't have the element of surprise." I nodded, my thoughts swirling. Clara had set us up, but she hadn't anticipated one thing: I knew her secrets. There was more to her than just a double-crossing accomplice. She had always been calculating, but now she had exposed her hand, and I couldn't help but wonder what she had been after all this time. Oscar glanced at me, sensing the change in my demeanor. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice cautious, as though he feared my next words could change everything. "I'm thinking that Clara isn't just a pawn," I said, my voice steady despite the unease building in my chest. "She's part of something bigger, something we're not seeing yet." Oscar turned sharply, his eyes narrowing as he tried to process my words. What do you mean? Reyes has been using her all this time, just like he's been using everyone else. But Clara is smarter than that. She's always had her own agenda, and I think we've been playing into it, I explained, my mind racing through the fragmented pieces of the puzzle. Oscar's jaw clenched. So you think she was working with Reyes the whole time? Not just with him. I think she's been playing both sides, and the ultimate goal was to get us here, into this mess. She needed us out of the way, and now she has what she wants. I paused, taking a deep breath as the weight of the realization hit me. And now, she's the one with the power. Oscar's eyes darkened. That's not possible. She was just trying to get close to Reyes. There's no way she could have manipulated him this much. I think you're underestimating her, Oscar, I said quietly, my voice almost a whisper. She's always been good at getting people to believe her lies. But I saw something tonight, something she didn't mean for me to see. Oscar glanced at me, his gaze intense. What did you see? I hesitated for a moment, then spoke. When she shot Julian, it wasn't just because she needed to take him out. It was because she knew it was the only way to make us think she was on our side. Oscar slammed his fist on the dashboard, his anger flaring. So, you're telling me she planned this from the start? She's been playing me, playing all of us? I nodded slowly, the gravity of my words settling in. I think she wanted us to think she was a victim. But the truth is, Clara's always been the one pulling the strings. There was a moment of silence between us, the weight of the situation hanging in the air. We were no longer just fighting against Reyes, we were up against an enemy we hadn't anticipated, someone from within our own ranks. Oscar was quiet for a long moment, his mind processing what I'd said. We need to get ahead of this, he finally said, determination flooding his voice. If Clara is really playing both sides, we need to make sure she doesn't get the upper hand. I nodded, my mind already working through possible strategies. But how do we get to her without playing into her game? Oscar's gaze flickered to me, his expression hardening. We don't. We make her think she has control, but we use it against her. We can't show her our hand too soon, but we can't let her have all the power either. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. This wasn't going to be easy, but we didn't have a choice. If we wanted to survive, we had to play the game smarter than Clara ever had. We drove in silence for a while longer, each of us lost in our thoughts, weighing the next move in this dangerous chess game. Oscar's plan was a risky one, make Clara think she was in control, all while slowly setting the pieces in place for her to fall into a trap. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. As we neared our safe house, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It wasn't just paranoia, I could sense something, or someone, lurking in the shadows. We're almost there, Oscar said, breaking the silence. His voice was tense, alert. Stay close, Ava. As we pulled into the driveway of the secluded house, the sudden flash of headlights behind us sent a jolt of panic through my chest. I turned to Oscar, who was already pulling into the garage at full speed. Someone's following us, I said, my voice tight with fear. Oscar didn't hesitate. He slammed the brakes and shot out of the car, pulling me along with him. We don't have time. Get inside. Now. We rushed inside the house, the door slamming shut behind us. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I tried to steady my breathing. Oscar was already moving toward the back of the house, checking every window, every possible escape route. Get the phone, he ordered. We need to contact Julian. We need to know what's going on with Clara. I hesitated. Julian is still with Reyes, Oscar. He's probably dead already. Oscar shot me a look. We can't afford to assume that. Not yet. My hands shook as I picked up the phone, but before I could dial, the lights flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. Oscar cursed under his breath. We're not alone. And then, a voice came from the shadows. Hello, Oscar. It was Clara. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. The trap had been sprung. Chapter 14, The Web Tightens. The darkness of the room seemed to press in on me, each breath feeling heavier than the last. Oscar's hand tightened around mine, his grip firm but his pulse erratic. The voice that came from the shadows sent a chill racing down my spine. Clara. Her presence, or rather, her voice, was like a ghost materializing in the space we had thought was safe. Her tone, soft but full of menace, echoed off the walls of the dimly lit room. "You've been running, Oscar," Clara purred, her voice like silk but sharp like a blade. "And now, it's time for you to stop." I took a step back, my mind racing. How had she found us? We were supposed to be hidden, in a safe house with all exits blocked. Every door, every window was sealed. There was no way she could have just walked in unless she was already here, I whispered, piecing together the sudden realization. Oscar's eyes widened as he turned to face me, his voice low. "She's been watching us." The realization hit hard, like a slap to the face. Clara hadn't just been manipulating from the sidelines, she had been plotting every move we made, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. We had underestimated her. "Oscar, you don't know who you're dealing with," Clara's voice came again, this time from behind us. She'd moved so quickly we hadn't even seen her. "I've been with you long before you met her. You were mine first." Oscar's body stiffened, his jaw clenching as he turned to face her. "You were never mine, Clara. You've always been a game to me." Clara's laugh was cold, devoid of humor. "You can lie to yourself all you want, but the truth is, you never stopped thinking about me." "Not really." Her words hit their mark. Oscar's expression faltered, just for a split second, before he regained control. But it was enough. Clara saw it, and she smiled. "Don't worry, Ava," Clara said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "I'm not here for you. I'm here for Oscar. He's the one I want." I stepped forward, my heart pounding, the weight of the situation sinking in. "What do you want, Clara?" I demanded. "Why are you doing this?" Clara's eyes flickered to me, almost as if she had forgotten I was there. "Oh, darling," she said with a slow, deliberate smile. "You're just a distraction. I'm not interested in you." I felt my stomach churn, her words like acid in my veins. I had known Clara was ruthless, but this was different. This wasn't just about power, it was about revenge. Oscar's expression hardened, the mask of calm slipping away. "You think I care about your games, Clara? I don't. I've moved on. It's over." Clara's smile deepened. "Is it? Because from where I'm standing, you're not done with me. Not by a long shot. You're still tangled in my web, Oscar. And you always will be." Her words were laced with venom, but there was something else in her eyes, something that made my blood run cold. A plan. I could feel the tension building, the air thick with unspoken promises. Oscar's hand reached for mine, his eyes never leaving Clara. "Ava, we need to get out of here. Now." I nodded, but before we could make a move, Clara raised a hand. "You're not going anywhere, Oscar. Not without paying the price for everything you've done." Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway outside, slow and deliberate, almost like they were meant to heighten the sense of dread. I could feel the shift in the air, the pressure, the weight of everything that had been leading to this moment. We were surrounded. Oscar pulled me close, his body shielding mine. His voice was tight with restraint. "Clara, you're making a mistake. You don't have to do this. We can figure this out, together." But Clara's eyes were already scanning the room, her lips curling into a smile as she spoke, almost gleeful. "I don't need you anymore, Oscar. And neither does anyone else. The game is over." In that instant, the door behind us flew open, and Julian stepped into the room. I froze. Julian, Oscar's brother, the very man I thought we had left behind in the chaos, stood before us, his gaze dark and calculating. "You two are so predictable," Julian said, his voice almost a whisper. Did you honestly think Clara wouldn't have backup? Oscar's eyes widened. Julian. You're with her? His voice was filled with disbelief, shock, and betrayal. Julian's smirk was cold and empty. I've always been with Clara, Oscar. Just like you've always been with her in one way or another. He took a step closer, his eyes lingering on me with contempt. This little game you're playing? It's over. The reality of the situation settled over us like a dark cloud. We were caught. Trapped in a web of lies and betrayal. And the worst part was, Clara and Julian had planned this all along. They had set us up from the very beginning. Do you see now, Oscar? Clara's voice was smug, triumphant. You were never going to win. You never had a chance. Oscar's expression was unreadable, but I could see the fire burning behind his eyes. He wasn't going to let this end like this, not without a fight. Not yet, Clara, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You've made a mistake. And with that, he turned to face Julian, his body tense and ready for whatever was coming next. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short, frantic gasps. The room felt like it was closing in on me, and there was no way out. No escape. But Oscar wasn't done yet. Neither was I. Get ready, he whispered to me, his eyes narrowing in determination. This isn't over. I nodded, my hands shaking but steadying with purpose. We weren't finished. Not by a long shot. And as the tension reached its breaking point, I realized something that I had never fully grasped before. This was a war, not a game. And in this war, there would be no mercy. Chapter 18, The Final Betrayal. The tension was unbearable. The air between us crackled with unspoken animosity as Oscar, Julian, and Clara stood on opposite sides of the room, a cold war simmering beneath their steely glares. Every word that passed between them felt like a dagger, every gesture another move in a game we had all been unwilling players in. Oscar stood at my side, his hand firmly clasped around mine, his body tense with the readiness of a man prepared for battle. I could see the storm brewing behind his eyes, a dangerous mixture of anger, regret, and something else, something darker that had been quietly growing inside him since the beginning of this twisted saga. Clara was watching us, her eyes glinting with malice. You think you can win, don't you? She said, her voice cold, like the icy wind before a storm. You've always been so predictable, Oscar. So weak. That's why I left you in the first place. Oscar's jaw clenched. You never left me, Clara. You just never cared. And you never will. I could hear the bitterness in his words, but I also sensed something else. A finality that made my heart race. And what about you, Ava? Clara's voice turned to me, filled with venom. You think you've won? You think you've stolen him away from me? You're nothing but a pawn in this game. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to speak, though my voice shook. I never wanted to be a pawn. But I won't let you manipulate us any longer. Not you, not Julian. A cruel laugh escaped Clara's lips. You think I've manipulated Oscar? He's the one who's always been obsessed with me. This little charade you've created with him, it's nothing but a fantasy. He'll come back to me. He always does. The venom in Clara's words stung, but there was no time for it to linger. My eyes flickered to Julian, whose face remained as impassive as a statue. There was something more to him than I had ever realized. He had been playing both sides this whole time, quietly pulling the strings without Oscar even knowing. Oscar was still staring at Clara, but his voice was now filled with finality. This is it, Clara. You've lost. Clara's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of doubt crossing her face before it was quickly masked by a mask of arrogance. I'm not the one who's lost, Oscar. You are. This game's been over from the moment you let your guard down. You never should have come back to me. With a sudden motion, Clara lunged forward, reaching for something from the pocket of her jacket. Before anyone could react, she pulled out a small, sleek device, a phone. I've made sure the world will know the truth, she said coldly, pressing a button. The moment the words left her mouth, I felt a chill run down my spine. The air grew heavy, charged with the weight of something unknown, something ominous that I couldn't quite place. Oscar's eyes darted to her in realization. "Clara, don't." But it was too late. A soft beep echoed through the room, followed by the unmistakable sound of a video starting. I didn't know what was coming, but I could already feel the dread pooling in my stomach. Clara turned the phone toward us, showing the screen. My heart dropped into my stomach as I saw the video. Oscar, standing with Clara, his arms around her waist, laughing as they kissed in the early days of their relationship. A moment of intimacy that no one, not even Oscar, had expected to see again. "You see, Ava," Clara sneered, "I was never gone. He never stopped loving me. And now, the whole world will know." Oscar's face drained of color. His eyes widened with shock, and he took a step forward. "Clara, you don't understand. That was a mistake. I never—" "Save it," Clara interrupted, her eyes flashing. "The damage is done. It's all out there now." The words hung in the air like a sword over us. I felt my breath catch in my throat, the weight of betrayal crashing down on me. But amidst the chaos, a small glimmer of clarity began to form. This wasn't just about a video, it was about control, about power. Clara was trying to break us, trying to make Oscar doubt everything we had built together. But I wasn't going to let her. Not this time. Oscar's voice was cold now, steely with the realization of what Clara had done. "You've lost, Clara. You've always been so consumed by your need for control, but I'm done. We're done." Clara's eyes flashed with fury. "You'll regret this, Oscar. You'll see. You'll all see." But before she could say another word, a sudden noise cut through the tension, a sound of shuffling feet and muffled voices. The door burst open, and the last person I expected to see walked in. It was Liam, Oscar's closest friend, and a man I had never fully trusted, but had come to rely on in the darkest moments. His face was grim, but his eyes were unwavering as he looked directly at Oscar. "Clara," Liam said, his voice firm, "I think it's time for you to leave." Clara froze, her eyes darting between Liam and Oscar. "You're siding with them," she spat. Liam's gaze didn't falter. "I'm not siding with anyone. But what you're doing, it's not just cruel, it's reckless. You're playing with fire, Clara. And this time, you're going to get burned." Oscar's hand tightened around mine, and I could feel the strength returning to him. The last vestiges of doubt began to crumble, piece by piece. Clara had pushed us to the edge, but she had underestimated how far we would go to fight for each other. And then, just like that, it all seemed to come to an end. Clara, her face twisted in disbelief, took one final step back. "You don't understand, Oscar. You never did. I loved you, and you never loved me the same. You'll never forgive yourself for letting me go." With those final words, Clara turned, her heels clicking sharply on the floor as she disappeared into the hallway, leaving behind only the echoes of her departure. The room was still, the silence deafening. Oscar and I stood together, both of us shaken but resolute. We had fought for our love, for our future, and we had won. Liam stepped forward, his expression softening. "It's over, Oscar. It's finally over." Oscar nodded, his hand still gripping mine. "Yeah. It's over." As the weight of the past began to lift, I realized that the hardest part was behind us. The world could see whatever it wanted to see, but what truly mattered was that we had survived. And we would rebuild, together. Oscar turned to me, his eyes filled with more love than I had ever seen before. "I'm sorry, Ava. For everything. But I promise, I'll never let you go again." And just like that, I knew we had reached the end of one chapter, and the beginning of the rest of our lives. Chapter 19, The Final Act of Justice. The silence in the room lingered, thick with the weight of everything that had just transpired. Clara's departure left a gaping hole, but with it came a sense of finality, a moment of clarity that Oscar and I had been craving for far too long. Oscar's grip on my hand tightened, his eyes now soft with regret but also resolute. "Ava, I need you to understand something." His voice was gentle, a stark contrast to the turmoil we'd just endured. "You were right. You were always right, and I let my emotions blind me. I allowed myself to be manipulated for far too long." I nodded, trying to process everything. The journey from betrayal to acceptance, the struggle with the past, and now, the overwhelming need to heal. But there was still one thing that needed to be done, one last piece of the puzzle that couldn't be left unaddressed. Clara had to be held accountable for the chaos she had caused. I turned to Liam, who had been quietly observing the entire exchange. "What do we do now?" I asked him, my voice filled with a calm urgency. Liam stepped forward, his face hardening as he spoke. "We make sure that Clara's actions don't go unpunished. She's spent far too much time wreaking havoc on people's lives. It's time for her to face the consequences of her manipulation." Oscar nodded, his expression grave. "Clara needs to understand that she can't just play with people's lives for her own benefit. She needs to face the damage she's caused." The pieces fell into place as Liam and I exchanged glances. We couldn't let her go free. There was a deeper punishment to be had, one that would expose her to the world for the manipulative, malicious person she was. She had hurt Oscar, betrayed his trust, and tried to destroy the love between us. With a resolve that matched Oscar's, I reached for my phone. The first step was to make sure that the video she had leaked didn't spread any further. Oscar's past was his own, but Clara had violated a fundamental boundary by using it as a weapon. I reached out to my lawyer, the one person I trusted to handle this situation. With a few quick messages, we began the legal process to ensure that the video was removed from all platforms and to issue a cease and desist order to Clara. But there was more. Oscar had trusted Clara for too long, believing in a relationship that was based on falsehoods. She had manipulated him into thinking they could rekindle something when, in truth, she had only been out for herself. Clara would face the legal consequences of her actions. "I'm going to press charges," Oscar said, his voice firm. "What she did, spreading lies, causing emotional distress, trying to tear us apart, it's not just a personal betrayal. It's criminal." Liam's eyes lit up with approval. "Good. It's time she paid for what she did, both to you and to Ava." With the decision made, we set the wheels in motion. Oscar's legal team was quick to act. The moment Clara's manipulations came to light, we made sure that she couldn't hide from the consequences. From the video she had leaked to the emotional abuse she had inflicted, everything would be put out in the open. Her career, her reputation, her entire world would crumble. Days passed in a blur as the legal proceedings took their course. Clara was served with a restraining order, and the video she had leaked was pulled from every platform. Oscar, with the help of his team, filed a lawsuit for defamation, emotional distress, and harassment. The walls she had built around herself began to crack, and soon, she had nowhere to hide. But it wasn't just about legal justice. We had to ensure that she would never manipulate anyone again. One evening, after everything had been set in motion, Oscar and I sat together in the quiet of our living room, the weight of it all slowly lifting. I turned to him, my heart heavy with the memories of everything that had happened, but also filled with a sense of peace. "Ava," Oscar said softly, "I'm sorry for the way things turned out. I should have never let her back into my life, should have never let her get to me like that. But I'm done with her. We're done with her." I placed my hand on his, my heart swelling with love for him. "I know. And we're moving forward now. We're finally free." It was then that I realized how much I had endured, how much I had fought for our love, and how much Oscar had grown. The past was behind us, but the future was ours to shape. Clara had tried to break us, to manipulate us both, but in the end, we had come out stronger. As the days passed, we saw the results of the legal actions we had taken. Clara's career collapsed under the weight of the truth, and the people who had once supported her turned their backs on her. The public perception of her was forever tarnished, and the consequences of her actions became her own prison. The punishment she so richly deserved had come, and there was no escape. Oscar and I didn't celebrate her downfall. Instead, we found solace in the quiet moments, those small, intimate moments where we could rebuild what we had almost lost. We focused on our future, on our love, and on our journey together. The final twist in the tale was the moment Clara came to us, once again desperate and broken. She had nowhere else to go, and she begged for forgiveness, but there was no place for her in our lives anymore. Oscar didn't even flinch when he spoke, his voice cold but resolute. "Clara, it's over. You can't keep dragging us into your mess. This is your consequence. I've moved on. Ava and I have moved on." And with that, Clara walked away for the final time, defeated by her own hand. In the end, the justice wasn't just about punishing Clara, it was about reclaiming our lives, our love, and our peace. Oscar and I had been tested in ways we never expected, but through it all, we emerged stronger. The future was ours to shape, and we would face it together. And as for Clara, the punishment she deserved was not just in the form of legal consequences, it was in the way she was erased from our lives, never to return. We had been through hell, but we had come out the other side, together.